My wife cheated, left me for another man, got pregnant, and then walked out on him too. Hi, my name's Michael and I'm 38. Looking back, it's crazy how my life kind of fell apart because of this secret I kept hidden. One that I thought my wife, Jennifer, was okay with. You know, I have this 10-year-old kid, Jack, from a previous marriage. Then I met Jennifer a few years ago after my first marriage ended in a divorce. She knew about Jack right from the start, and I told her everything about my past, how Sarah and I split up after having Jack, etc. It was tough, but we made it work, and co-parenting is the best part of my life now. Jack comes first, and to Jennifer's credit, she seems to understand, at least at the start. When Jen and I started dating, she told me she liked how responsible I was about taking care of my kid. We talked about having kids together, but that never happened because we were both busy with our own lives. But over time, things started to change. Jen's kindness to Jack started to fade, and there were more arguments between us. Every time we saw Jack, it would lead to some kind of argument. I thought it was just from stress at work and life, but then something really bad happened. It was Jack's 10th birthday, and I planned a little party at my house. I invited Sarah to come and be there with us so Jack would have both parents. Jen agreed, but she didn't seem too happy about it. I didn't think anything serious would happen. But then, out of nowhere, something terrible did. On the day of the party, things seemed normal at the start. We decorated the place, Jen made a cake, and for a few hours it felt like a regular, happy family thing. But then, I noticed how Jen was looking at Sarah, cold and distant. I tried not to worry because Sarah and I have been through a lot, and we were just co-parenting then. I thought Jen understood that. But then, something happened I never could have imagined. A chain of events that destroyed everything I thought I had with Jen started. Later that night, after everyone had left, the mood in the house changed. Jen barely spoke to me, and her answers were short and clipped. When I asked if everything was okay, she nodded, but I felt an unspoken tension between us. I didn't push her, telling myself it was just a bad day. A few days went by, and things started to get worse. Jen was more distant, staying away from me at home and staying late at work. We hardly talked, and I was spending more time with Jack, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. Then one night, I overheard something I shouldn't have heard. I'd put Jack to bed and was walking down the hall when I heard Jen talking on the phone. At first, I thought it was just her chatting with a friend about her day. But then I listened closer and realized she wasn't just talking about herself. She was talking about me and Jack too. "I can't keep doing this," she said, sounding frustrated. "It's like I'm living some other person's life. Every time I see them, I see her. She has her family, and I'm just what? The third wheel." A chill went down my spine as I realized she was talking about me. I wanted to walk away, but couldn't stop listening. "I thought I could deal with it," she went on. "But I can't. It's all about Jack. Everything is about him. I'm sick of it. I've had enough of being a third wheel." Those words hit me hard. Did she mean that? The woman I love, who promised to be part of our lives, our sons, said she can't take it anymore. I quietly went back to our bedroom. My heart was pounding and my mind racing with questions. What did she mean? Was she just stressed out, or was there something else going on? And why did she suddenly start acting like Jack was a problem after 5 years together? As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew something had to change, but I had no idea how much worse things could get, or how far Jen was willing to go to get away from the life we'd built together. As the days went by, the tension between me and Jennifer only got more intense. It felt like we were living in different worlds, even though we were in the same house. She'd come home late from work sometimes, without saying why. Our conversations were short and boring, just about bills and groceries. There was an awful silence in the house, and I had a feeling that something big was going on under the surface. I tried talking to Jennifer about it, but she wouldn't tell me what was wrong. I asked if she was still mad about Jack's birthday or if something else was up, but every time I brought it up, she just brushed me off. She said it was nothing, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But I knew something was up. I just knew it. And it wasn't just about Jack and Sarah anymore. I started wondering if there was somebody else involved. I didn't want to think about it, but the signs were all there. Late nights out, secret phone calls, and an emotional distance I couldn't ignore. So one evening, when Jennifer was out with her friends, I did something I'd never done before. I searched her phone. She'd left it charging in the kitchen, and as much as it pained me to admit it, I needed to know the truth. My mind raced with questions. If there was something going on, I had to find out what it was. As I unlocked her phone and started scrolling through her messages, my hands started to shake. I felt guilty, but I pushed those feelings aside and kept going. At first, everything seemed normal, just regular chats with friends and work colleagues. But then I saw a message from someone named Chris. I didn't really know who they were at first, but there was something about their chat that seemed off. It was all flirty and way too familiar for my liking. I went back and checked through all the messages from weeks ago, and my heart sank with every word I read. The more I looked, the more obvious it became. Jennifer had been seeing someone else besides me. Chris was more than just a coworker or old pal. He meant something more. My blood ran cold when I saw a message a few days after Jack's party. "So how was seeing your ex and kid?" Chris asked. Jennifer replied, "Horrible. I can't stand being near them anymore. It's like being trapped. I just need to get away." Chris said, "But you know you don't have to stay here. We can have our own lives together. Just the two of us." I was sitting there in shock, my phone sliding out of my hand. My brain was racing with thoughts. She'd planned this escape from our life together. From Jack and everything. And Chris, he wasn't just some random guy. He was an escape plan for her. A fresh start without me and Jack. I was sick. How could she do that? How could she betray us after everything we'd been through? My thoughts kept coming back to Jack. He was a kid, innocent and oblivious to the chaos around us. What would it mean for him? And what about Sarah? She'd find out her son was caught up in this mess. I paced the house for hours, trying to figure out what to do. My heart was broken, but my mind was filled with rage and confusion. I wanted to confront her the second she walked in the door, but I didn't want it to be true. That night, Jen came home late, like usual. I was sitting in the living room, waiting for her. When she walked in, there was a tension in the air. "You're still up?" she asked, surprised to see me. I said, "We need to talk." My voice was low and serious. She paused, eyes narrowing like she knew what was coming. "What's up?" I stood up and walked slowly across the room. Chris, her face went blank for a second. Then she got cold and defensive. "What about him?" "I know about the texts," I said, trying to stay calm even though I was on the verge of exploding. "I know what's been going on between you two." Her eyes flickered with panic, then turned angry. "You went through my phone." "That doesn't matter," I replied. "How long has this been happening? How long have you been lying to me?" For a second, I thought she was going to deny it, but then she just sighed like she was too exhausted to care. "Does it matter? You already know, right?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The woman I thought I knew, the one I built my life around, was standing in front of me admitting to an affair like it was no big deal. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with questions I didn't want to ask, but one stood out above all others. "Why, Jen? Why did you do this to me?" I asked, my voice cracking. She looked at me with a blank expression and said, "I'm just tired. Tired of always being in the background. Every time I see Jack, it reminds me that he'll always come first for you." I tried to be okay with that, but I just couldn't. I stared at her, trying to process everything she said. This wasn't just about an affair, it was about my child. Anger bubbled up at the thought of losing my little guy. "He's my son, and he'll always be a part of me." "And that's the thing," she said, a bit snappishly. "I didn't sign up for being second to your kid or your ex." Her words stung me like a knife in the heart. I could feel anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What now, then? You just gonna leave me hanging?" Jennifer shrugged like the answer was obvious. Maybe I already did. The days after Jennifer's confession were some of the hardest I've ever had to face. The house, once warm and happy, felt empty and hollow. Jennifer left soon after our fight, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the hard reality of our broken marriage. She didn't offer any apologies or explanations beyond what she'd already said. In her mind, she'd made up her mind and there was no going back. For Jack, I tried to keep things as normal as possible. He's too young to understand the complexities of grown-up relationships, so I wanted to protect him from the chaos unfolding around us. But even at 10, Jack wasn't dumb. He picked up on the change, the tension in the air. Whenever he asked about Mom and why she wasn't around anymore, he could sense it. "Where's Mom?" he'd ask one night while we were having dinner. Those innocent blue eyes of his were looking for answers I wasn't ready to give. "She's going to be staying somewhere else for a bit," I said, trying not to let my voice crack. "She just needs some space to breathe." "Is she mad at me?" Jack asked, his voice soft and unsure. My heart sank at his words. "No, hon, she's not mad at you," I replied. "This has nothing to do with you. Adults sometimes need time to sort out their feelings, He nodded slowly, but I knew he wasn't completely convinced. I wasn't sure how to explain it to him either. How can you tell your child that the person you love has decided they can't do this anymore, that they resent them just for being in their life? As the weeks went by, I tried my best to adjust to life without Jen. I buried myself in work, focusing on projects to keep my mind off the hole she left behind. I tried to spend as much time with Jack as possible, trying to make up for the emotional turmoil that had taken over our home. But no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't shake that feeling of betrayal, that nagging thought that I'd missed something, that it was all my fault. And then, when things couldn't possibly get any worse, Jen dropped another bombshell. It had been about 2 months since she left. I only heard from her a few times, mostly short messages about splitting up our stuff or arranging to pick up the rest of her things. No mention of reconciliation, no hint of regret from her. She seemed content to move on with her life, and mostly I accepted that. But one day, out of nowhere, Jennifer called me. Her voice was so calm, like she had rehearsed what she wanted to say 100 times. "Michael, I need to talk about something important," she started. I had no idea what it could be, so I just asked, "What's up?" I'm going to be a mom," she said. For a second, I didn't understand. I just stood there, the phone pressed to my ear as her words replayed in my mind. "What? You're pregnant?" I finally asked. She explained that it was with Chris, and they'd been seeing each other for a while. She said it was just a surprise like an accident. My heart sank as I realized what she meant. "You're telling me that you left us because of our kid, because you couldn't deal with him, and now you're having another kid with another guy?" I asked, my voice trembling. I didn't care anymore. All the anger, hurt, and betrayal just overwhelmed me. Jennifer sighed like I was being crazy. "It's different with Chris," she said. "He doesn't have any ex-wives or kids from previous relationships, so we can just start over." I couldn't believe it. "So, what? You're just going to leave me behind and start a new life without any thoughts of what we had here?" "I'm sorry if you can't understand it, but that's what I want," she replied, her tone cold. "I've moved on, and I think you should too." The phone slipped out of my hand and landed on the floor with a thud, leaving me in total shock. I was pregnant with her child. The woman I loved, trusted, had not only betrayed me, but also started a new life while ours was falling apart. It felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts, everything spiraling out of control inside me. All I had left was Jack, so I had to keep going for him, even though it felt like the whole world was crashing down around me. Over the next few days, my thoughts took over me more and more. I didn't know how to deal with the news, and every time I saw her, her betrayal weighed on me heavily. How could she do this to us? How could she just replace us with someone else? It wasn't until my ex, Sarah, called that things got weird. We had our differences, but she was always a big part of Jack's life. Even though we broke up, we tried to keep things civil for Jack's sake. But with everything going downhill for me, I didn't know how long I could keep pretending to be fine. "Hey, can we chat?" Sarah asked, her voice soft and caring. She heard from friends that I broke up with Jennifer, but I didn't tell her everything. "Sure," I said, even though I didn't really want to talk about it. I didn't want to rehash the mess I was in, but when she came over, she could tell something was up and sat down across from me at the table. She started, "I'm so sorry about Jen, but I just want to check in on you. How are you doing? How's Jack?" I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. "Jack's fine, or I guess he is. I just try to be there for him." Sarah nodded, and her face softened. "I know it's hard, Michael. You don't have to go through this alone, okay?" Her words, so simple, hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in a while, I felt the weight of all the emotions I'd been trying to carry: anger, hurt, betrayal. And in that moment, I realized I'd tried to deal with everything on my own. "Thanks, Sarah." My voice cracked. I don't know what to do. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," she said softly. "But you need to talk to people. You need support for Jack's sake. He needs you more than ever." She was right. Jack needed me, and though I wanted to isolate myself, I knew I couldn't. Not for him, not anymore. After that talk with Sarah, I realized that isolating myself just wasn't helping me move on. The truth is, I had to face up to what happened, not just for myself, but for Jack too. He's my rock, and if I want to move forward, he needs to be part of my life again. Despite that, the pain from Jennifer's betrayal was still there. Like a dark cloud, I couldn't escape. Every time I thought I was over it, her words, her cold, empty confession would come back and haunt me. A couple of weeks went by, and life started to get back to normal, sort of. I spent more time with Jack, trying to immerse myself in his world, his school, his sports, his friends, to take my mind off Jennifer and her new life with Chris. But it didn't really make things okay. Far from it, actually. Every quiet moment, every lonely night, reminded me of the family I lost and the marriage I thought was solid, but turned out to be nothing but an illusion. It wasn't until Jen reached out again that I realized just how much more there was to face. I hadn't heard from her since she mentioned her pregnancy. She moved in with Chris, and as far as I know, she's been moving on with her new life, leaving the mess behind. But then one day, when I was picking Jack up from school, my phone went off with a text from Jen. "We need to talk, it's important." I stared at the text, thoughts racing through my head. What could she want? She'd already wrecked my world. What more could she say? Reluctantly, I agreed to meet up with her that night. Every part of me wanted to ignore her and leave her to deal with her own life, but there was a part of me, maybe the part that needs closure, that needed to hear what she has to say. We met up at a little cafe on the edge of town. When I saw her, all sorts of emotions rushed through me: anger, sadness, confusion. She looked different, like a weight had lifted off her shoulders. She was glowing, but I knew that it had nothing to do with me or us. "Michael," she started softly, "thanks for coming." I didn't say anything, just nodded and waited for her to get to the point. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. She continued, "I know it's hard, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but there's something you need to understand." Sitting back in my seat and crossing my arms, I said, "Understand what? You made your choice. What's there to understand?" Her words stung a bit, but she kept going. "I realize I hurt you, and what I did was wrong," she said. "But it wasn't about Jack. That took me by surprise." "What do you mean?" She sighed, looking down at the table. "It wasn't really about him. It was more about me. I felt like I was trapped, not because of you or Jack, but because of the life I tried to lead." I stared at her, not really understanding what she meant. "But it didn't matter because you still left, Jennifer. You made Jack feel like he was the problem." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw the real woman behind the mask. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll never forgive myself for what I did. But Michael, I just didn't know what else to do." Her words hurt, but they didn't clear anything up. If anything, they just made things even more confusing. I'd spent so much time beating myself up, wondering what I'd done wrong. And now she's telling me that it wasn't my fault or Jack's. It was just her inability to adjust. Taking a deep breath, I tried to keep my voice even. "So, why tell me now, Jennifer? What do you expect me to do with that information?" She wiped a tear off her cheek and looked at me with those eyes that were begging for understanding. "I just wanted to be honest," she said. "I don't need anything from you, I didn't want you to hate me forever." Hate her? That thought had crossed my mind a million times since she left, but when I looked into her eyes, I knew that hating wouldn't make a difference. It wouldn't undo what happened. "I'm not mad at you, Jen," I said softly, "but I still can't forgive." She nodded, looking defeated. "I understand, and I'm sorry," she said. After that, we sat in silence for a few minutes, until she stood up and left. When she was gone, I felt a mix of emotions, relief and sadness. Even though I had some closure, there was still no peace. Over the next few weeks, things continued in a weird, fragmented way. Jennifer was basically out of my life, although we'd occasionally exchange messages about splitting up assets. Jack would ask about her sometimes, and each time, I'd given the same answer. "She's not coming back." I just had to accept it. She wasn't coming back, and maybe that was for the best. But just when I was starting to find some stability, another challenge popped up, one that would put everything I had left to the test. One evening, after Jack had gone to bed, there was a knock at my door. I was surprised, because I wasn't expecting anyone. I cautiously went to the door, wondering who it could be. When I opened it, there was Chris standing there. Seeing him made me uncomfortable. He looked anxious, shifting from foot to foot, unsure what to do. I wanted to just shut the door in his face, but something in his eyes made me pause. "What do you want?" I asked coldly and abruptly. Chris ran a hand through his hair and sighed. I didn't know what else to do. Jennifer, she left. My head was spinning with questions. Where did she go? Where did she go? I repeated as he looked at the ground. His voice was quiet and almost a whisper when he said, "She just left me." I stood there, trying to process what he'd said. Jennifer, the woman who had uprooted her life to be with him, had also left him. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, still trying to understand. He shook his head. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice trembling. "She's pregnant and just left. You know her better than I do." A wave of anger washed over me. There he was, the guy who took my wife and my whole life away, standing on my porch asking for help. I wanted to just slam the door shut in his face and tell him to deal with it himself. But then I thought about the baby, about Jennifer's unborn kid, and I realized that no matter how bad I wanted to get away from the situation, I just couldn't. We were all stuck in it together, good or bad. Chris's words were hanging in the air, like a bad dream that I just couldn't seem to wake up from. Jennifer had left him, just like that. The woman who had destroyed everything in my life in order to be with Chris had walked away. It just didn't make any sense, but then again, nothing about Jennifer's actions had made sense for a long time. I stood there, staring at Chris, torn between anger and disbelief. One part of me wanted to laugh in his face and tell him that he deserved everything that had happened, but another part of me just couldn't look away from him, because I still remembered all the good times we had with Jennifer. Despite every muscle in my body telling me to just leave, I gestured for Chris to come inside. We sat down at the kitchen table, where Jennifer had told me about her affair, and it felt so surreal, sitting across from each other, both of US victims of her decisions. "She just left?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around it all. Chris nodded, his face looking pale and worried. "Yeah, she said she needs some space. She can't handle being pregnant or being with me. I thought we were happy, but it turns out I was wrong," he said, sounding a bit bitter. I felt a little bit of satisfaction at his words, like maybe he was finally realizing the betrayal I'd felt for months, but it didn't feel right to enjoy his pain. After all, Jennifer was carrying his child, and despite everything, I didn't want him or the baby to suffer. "So, what do you want me to do, Chris?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He let out a sigh and ran his hands through his hair. "I have no idea. Maybe you can talk to her? She listens to you, right?" That made me almost laugh. "She doesn't listen to me anymore. She's made up her mind, and now you're on your own." He slumped back into his chair. "I'm so lost. I don't know what to do anymore." Those words really hit me. I know all too well how it feels to be unprepared for the responsibilities of being a parent. When my own son was born, I had all those same fears and doubts, but I chose to stay and face them, to be the dad my son needed. And now, thinking about Jennifer's baby, I can't help but wonder what would happen if she keeps running away. "I don't know where Jennifer is right now," I finally say, "but this baby needs someone to look after it. Whether she's here or not, it needs a home." Chris looks at me with those big eyes, almost begging. What if I can't be that person? I lean back in my chair and sigh. None of us start off as perfect parents. We learn to be better because we have to be. He nodded slowly, taking in what I said. We sat there for a bit, both lost in thought. I felt sorry for him, even though I wanted to hate him. He looked as lost as me, thrown into something he wasn't ready for. After a while, Chris stood up, awkwardly said thanks, and left. Watching him go into the night made me feel like it was over, not just with Jennifer, but the whole thing. It wasn't in my control anymore. I couldn't change what Jennifer did, but I could decide how I responded and moved forward. The next few weeks went by quickly for me. No news from Jennifer or Chris. Jack and I got into our new normal, and for the first time in a while I started feeling like moving on. There were still times of pain, when I missed what I thought we had with Jennifer, but those were fewer and further apart. Slowly, I learned to let go. One afternoon, as I was picking up Jack after soccer practice, my phone went off. I saw it was Jennifer calling, and my stomach did a little flip. It had been a few weeks since we'd talked, and I wasn't sure I was ready. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Michael," she said, her voice sounding tired and defeated. "We need to talk." There was a silence. Part of me wanted to hang up, to tell her I'd had enough. But then that other part, the part that remembered who we used to be, told me to listen. I asked where she was. She said a coffee shop on the outskirts. I agreed to go meet her, even though I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe some kind of resolution, maybe an apology. When I walked in, there she was, all by herself at a corner table. She didn't look like herself. Her usual confident self had been replaced with something softer and more vulnerable. As she picked up her coffee, her hands were shaking slightly. Her eyes, which used to be so cold, held regret. "I'm so sorry," she started before I could even sit down. "For everything, for hurting you, for leaving, for Jack." Her words caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting them. For months, I'd been waiting for this moment, for her to finally admit the damage she'd done. But now that it had happened, It didn't feel as satisfying as I'd hoped. I said calmly but firmly, "Jennifer, why? Why'd you leave?" She sighed, looking at her hands. "I don't know, I thought I knew what I wanted. But I was wrong. Scared. Scared of failing as a parent. Scared of not knowing how to be a mom to Jack. When I found out about the pregnancy, I panicked. So, you just ran? You left everything behind because you were scared?" She nodded, her eyes starting to well up with tears. "I know it wasn't the best decision, but I was so scared and I didn't know what else to do. I messed up, and I know I have to face the consequences. Look, you can't just expect everything to go back to normal. You hurt people, especially Jack. I know, and I'm so sorry, but I'm working on it. I'm getting help, trying to figure things out, be a better mom for our baby, and for all of us." There was a long pause. In her eyes, there was regret and pain. She had caused just as much hurt to herself as she had to others. But I knew there wasn't much I could do to fix her. "Just hope you find what you need," I said softly. "Right now, Jack comes first for me." She nodded and brushed away a tear. "Got it. Respect that." We said our goodbyes not long after. No promises of making up, no big gestures of forgiveness. It was just a silent understanding that our paths had diverged, and that was okay. On my way home, I felt a bit of peace. The storm that had torn through my life was finally starting to calm down, and for once, I could see the future beyond the wreckage. It would be hard, there would still be obstacles and moments of uncertainty, but I had Jack by my side, and that was all I needed. Jennifer's part in my life was over. It was time for a fresh start with Jack as the center of my world. Whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. After all, together, we were stronger than any pain or betrayal. That's what mattered most to me. If you like such stories, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. It will be the biggest support for me.